Hi everyone, Fox is here. I was about to do my February wrap-up video, but then I watched Samantha over Novels and Nonsense, and she did Underhyped Fantasy Books video, which I absolutely loved, and I decided to do one of my own. I read a lot of fantasy books. Like I mentioned in my intro video, I've been reading fantasy pretty much since I was a teenager, but I love fantasy, and the books that I've read and thoroughly enjoyed, nobody's talking about them. I don't think anyone even knows those authors because some of them are admittedly quite old books. Some of them were published back in the 80s, but I still think they're pretty awesome. So I'm bringing you today my personal underhyped fantasy books video. So the first author that I would like to talk about is Lynn Flewelling. She is my number one absolutely favorite fantasy writer. This is Luck in the Shadows, book number 1 in Night Runner series. Originally, this book came out in 1996. I think this is a second reprint, not really sure, but I have all of her 7 books and other books that she published in other trilogy. And the last book in the series, number 7, came out in 2014. I highly recommend her books, whatever you pick up, whether that be other trilogy or Night Runner series. But this is book number 1. This is book number 2, Stalk in Darkness, and these 2 books can be pretty much read as standalone or duology. So if you decide to try her books, you can just start with this 2 and then see for yourself whether you want to continue or not. This is high fantasy, a series. I absolutely love the world that she created. It's a high fantasy. There are magic in there. There are a lot of nations, a lot of different countries, and the story is about a young boy named Alec who gets into prison in the book number 1, and he is rescued from that prison by his fellow inmate who happens to be a spy, a thief, and also a nobleman. There is a lot that happens in the story, and I don't want to give away a lot just because it might spoil some parts of the storyline for you guys. But what I want to say is that it's very well written. The world itself is very magical, and it has a lot of depth to it. So it's just really well written. For me personally, these books mean quite a lot, not only as a reader but also as a person. They shaped me in some way, and what I like about the story, besides the fights, the spine, and oh my god, there is so much that's happening in there. And what I like the most is probably the relationships in those books, because these books not only have families and relatives, but there is also a very strong theme of chosen families, which I absolutely love. Another thing that you have to know is that this book has a lot of queer characters in it, and the world itself is built so, and the society is built so, that nobody's really treating queer characters any differently, which I think is a very good thing. And when Lynn Flewelling wrote those books back in the 90s, those were probably one of the very few ones that had very positive image of queer characters. There are a lot of strong women in these books as well. I read 5 books in the series. I haven't read yet the last 2 books, only because I got them not that long ago, just a couple of years ago, but I just never had a chance to read them, and I didn't want to read them as standalones. I wanted to read the whole series, and you know, reading all 7 books is a bit of a commitment. So I'm sorry, I had to change my angle a bit because my knees were killing me. Another reason why I love this series so much, especially the first 2 books, they mean a lot to me. And the reason for that is because my grandfather used to read them alongside with me, and he also really liked them. And he shaped me a lot as a reader, and he introduced me a lot to a lot of books when I was a child. And I remember reading those books, and I was on a high fantasy streak back then. I was a teenager, and he read all of the books that I bought, but he kept, coming over and saying, hey, can you give me those books by that Lynn woman? And he always said, oh, that Lynn woman. And he absolutely loved the series. He loved those two books, and I loved those books as well. Unfortunately, grandfather is no longer with us. It's been years since he passed away, but one of my most fondest memories have to do with books, and these books in particular. I just love them so much. Another thing which I love about these books is that it has so many beautiful characters. Like, honestly, all of them are gorgeous, and there are so many wonderful, strong women in it. Oh my goodness, this is just so good. My other all-time favorite fantasy author is Katherine Kurtz, and this is her very first trilogy, which is called The Chronicles of Dareni, and it's book number 1, Dareni Rising, book number 2, Dareni Checkmate, and book number 3, High Dareni. Book number 1 came out in 1976, so quite a while ago, and this is a reprint from 2008, I believe. You still can find these books, these editions that I'm holding on Amazon, even though the author wrote quite a lot of books over the years, and she's still writing, because the last book in the Dareni series came out in 2014, I believe. I haven't read it yet, but I do have it. So this is the trilogy set in the quite interesting world. I would call it probably not exactly high fantasy, but epic fantasy, historical type of fantasy. The world itself reminiscent of Middle Ages Britain, Scotland and Wales to be precise. Dareni is a type of humans with magic abilities. So they can read minds, they can heal people, they can move objects, but they've been basically forced into hiding by the church, because the church in this country, the country is called, the kingdom is called Gwynedd, is very powerful. So the church condemned Dareni, and they basically consider them to be spawns of devil. So they are forced into hiding, they hide their magic abilities, but at the beginning of this book, the king of Gwynedd passes away, so his son, quite young teenage boy, has to take the throne, and it turns out that he has those magic abilities. If you want to try out the series, you should be definitely starting with these 3 books, because this is where everything is happening. So if you want to read more books, there are definitely quite more books. I haven't read all of them, I admit that, but this trilogy, I read it when I was a teenager, and I absolutely loved it, because the writing itself is very mature, it's very serious in tone, it reads a lot like a historical novel, because there are a lot of elements in it that come from history, like Middle Ages, Catholic Church, quite a lot of other things as well. But if you like historical fantasy books, this is definitely the book to read. I highly recommend it. Unfortunately, not all books by Katherine Kurtz are available in print right now, and I don't think any are available on Kindle, but this trilogy, this initial trilogy, The Chronicles of Dareni, is definitely available on Amazon, so please check it out. There's this character in this book, Morgan, who is an advisor and who used to be best friend of the late king, and now he's an advisor and best friend to Jan Kelsen. I had such a huge crush on this character when I was a teenager. It wasn't healthy, guys. I just absolutely loved him, because the way Katherine Kurtz described him, about how powerful he is, how noble he is, how selfless he is. And there is also this dark aura around him, like how there were so much, you know, speculation and intrigue surrounding this character about how everyone is goes like, oh, there must be something wrong with this guy, or you know, there might be something dark around surrounding him, and there is a lot of like gossip about him being Dorini, but he never even like never admits to it. I just loved him. Okay, read it, please. No, seriously, just read it. Just go and read it. Yes. I should probably read this one. Another one of my favorite authors and underhat books is Swords Point by Ellen Kushner. So this is book number 1 in Riverside series. I don't want to call it a trilogy because there is book number 1, then there is a book which is connected to it, but set several years later, I believe, The Privilege of Sword, and there is Fall of the Kings. But I know that Ellen Kushner, as well as this book was written together with Taylor Sherman, which is her wife actually, and they together created this wonderful world of Swords Point, which I really love. There is not that much magic in it, but there is a lot of swords fights and a lot of politics and intrigue as well. It's called A Melodrama of Manners. It has a very beautiful tone to it. I like the depiction of high society, the way they spend their days on the lake, drinking hot chocolate from small cups. It's very well written. It has a very solid world. It has a very beautiful language. And another thing, it has queer characters in it as well. Book number 3, I read all of the books more than once, but book number 3, there's a funny fact about it. I read all of the book except for the last 10 pages, and the reason for that is that there is something there is something happening in those last 10 pages that I know of, and I don't want to read that. There is a wonderful build up of tension and suspension by the end of the book, but I know what's going to happen and I don't want it to happen, and I fear that happening. That's why I have never read the remaining 10 pages. It's kind of sad, but it's at the same time, I don't know, maybe one day I will be brave enough to do that, but right now I'm not. Another author that I absolutely love and highly recommend is Sara Manon and her series of books, which is called The Doctrine of Labyrinths. The book number 1 is Melusine, the book number 2, The Virtue, book number 3, The Mirador, and book number 4, Carampus. This series is dark type of fantasy. It is set in a very interesting world, and there are 2 main protagonists, and the book is told from their perspective. One is Maltmay, who is a thief and assassin, and the second one is Felix, who is a wizard. They meet together. There is a huge segregation of the society between upper and lower classes, and those 2 should have never met or should have never interacted together, but they meet and something happens, and I don't want to spoil it, but I just want to say that this book has a wonderful lyrical language to it. It's very dark. Don't take me wrong. It's very dark. There are a lot of topics about like abuse and torture, and there is a lot of stuff in there which probably not be suitable to a lot of people, but the way it's written is really beautiful, and I admit that the first part of the book, maybe 1/3 of it, is a bit slow because it's just basically a build up to the point where the characters would meet, and then once they do and things start to happen, it's mind-blowing. This is book number 2 in the Doctrine of Labyrinth series, and I just wanted to point you to the cover of this book, and there is a reason for it. If you don't know, my Instagram account is Mild May, and usually people assume that it's Mild May, but actually it's a name of a character from this book, Mild May. Here's the guy, look at him, he's a redhead, and his other nickname is Fox. You see? Mild May, Fox. Mild May, Fox. So yeah, that's the reason why I picked that username, and I prefer to call myself either Fox or Mildmay on internet. And I love Mildmay. He is a very sarcastic, a very tough guy, but at the same time he has a very soft side to him as well. He's a thief, he's an assassin, he speaks using a lot of slang and slurs, and he is depicted. One of the things that I really like about the series, that a lot of importance is put on the language itself, and the language, the way he speaks, he always feels embarrassed about it because he's not sounding as proper, or as eloquent, or as intelligent as his counterpart Felix. So I really love Mildmay for it. And another thing is that in this book there are quite intricate swearing. There is one of the phrases that he says a lot that I don't know how to repeat in polite society, but that's my absolutely favorite swearing. I don't use it, but if something happens, I usually say it in my head. I just think about it. I think I might even post it somewhere here just for you to know how it is. So yeah, I really love the series. Love it. Another author that I would like to talk about is C.S. Friedman, and to be precise, I want to talk about the Cold Fire trilogy, which is Black Sun Rising, book number 1. Book number 2 is When True Night Falls, and book number 3 is Crown of Shadows. Yes, Crown of Shadows. Now, this series is actually quite an interesting blend of dark fantasy and sci-fi, because they're set in the world called Erna, and that world is in fact a different planet to which people moved from Earth. When people moved to that world, they discovered that there are some dark magic powers that reside on that planet. It's called Fae, or Fae, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And basically, those dark powers, they don't want humans on their planet. This story is about people who decided to fight those dark powers. All of them are there are 3 or 4 people traveling together. They're all quite different. They're not exactly friends, but the dynamic between them is quite interesting. Another thing is that there are priests, and there are people who can talk to that dark fae and use it. And there are also vampires in this book. So yeah, I don't know how to describe it in any other way. And look at those covers. Look at those covers. I just love those covers. I think they're so cool. Another author that I would like to talk about, and I don't know why nobody mentions him, but it's Gavriel Kay, and I want to talk about his Fionavore Tapestry trilogy. Oh my god, I hope I pronounced it right. So Gavriel Kay is a Canadian author, and he actually lives in Toronto. So book number 1 is The Summer Train. Book number 2, The Wandering Fire. And book number 3, The Darkest Road. First of all, look at those editions. They're so adorable. I just love those. They're not too thick, but they're so cute. I got them from Book Outlet, I think, during their Christmas or maybe Black Friday sale. They're absolutely adorable. I love them. These books are about 5 students from University of Toronto who are approached by a magician who tells them, oh, you know what, you're traveling with me to a magic world and you have to do magic stuff. So this is what the story is about. It's set in Toronto, which I absolutely love. It's an urban type of fantasy, which very quickly turns into some sort of high fantasy story. Another thing is that it's highly influenced by Arthur legends. So if you're a fan of Arthur and everything that has to do with Arthur, you'll probably enjoy these books. I really enjoyed them, and there is a lot of stuff which is happening to those young protagonists, and the way that they emerge from those situations, and they emerge as changed people. And I think that in some way these books remind me of Narnia, because we started with very young people who are plunged into a magical world, and they are basically have to shape that world, and they play a very important part of that world. I think these books are very reminiscent of that. So the last one, but definitely not the least one, I want to talk about books by Judith Guitar. So I have these two omnibus editions of the Avarian series. They're pretty heavy. So this edition has the first three books, which is Hall of the Mountain King, The Lady of Hangilin, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and A Fall of Princes. This omnibus is called Avarian Rising, and this edition is called Avarian Resplendent, which has Arrows of the Sun, Spear of Heaven, and Tides of Darkness. I admit that I read only 4 books in this series. There are 6 books altogether, and I read only 4 of them. I just never had a chance to get a hold of the last 2 books, but now I have them and I'm really excited. Unfortunately, she wrote most of her books back in the, I think, 90s, and they were never reprinted. I got these 2 omnibus editions from one of the bargain websites. So book number 1 is The Hall of the Mountain King, and if you want to start reading the series, that's definitely the book that you should be starting with. All the books are standalones and they can be read as standalones. The only difference is that they're all set in the same world, and there are some things that connect them, but otherwise you can pick and choose each one of them and pretty much will be able to follow the story. The world itself, there is magic in it. There is a lot of that has to do with gods and goddesses. I'm not sure if I'm describing it the way it should be described, but I really enjoyed the story. I liked the way the characters were described. I probably should, reread those because it's been a while, but I really like them. So if you haven't, so this is it, guys. I'm sorry if this video was a bit all over the place, but I really wanted to talk about my favorite books, and unfortunately, as you can see, I sometimes struggle just because I just want to tell you, just go and read it. I don't know how to describe a book so to make it more enticing for you or more appealing. I just can tell you that I loved it, and if you trust my opinion, you should definitely check it out. I know that a lot of books that I recommended today are out of print right now, and I apologize for that, but you know what? Bargain bookstores and the libraries are your friends. My friends as well. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If any of you read the books that I recommended, please let me know. I want to discuss these books. I absolutely love them. So let's discuss down below. Thank you so much, and bye! I like how I started all of my videos and go like, yeah, I'm gonna do it, and then I open my mouth and there is nothing. Obviously I struggled today. I love this mug. It has a moose on it. It's a very Canadian but not Canadian mug. Hi, Becca.